Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. I don't know why I keep saying that because like suddenly it's going to change over the break that you have a different host. I don't know. I'm just kind of crazy. Anyway, it's a very interesting conversation about Ukraine. And as we talked about, we touched on the whole issue of President Trump and his tariffs. And now we're honored to have with us Muktar Mohammed. Hope I say that name correctly. Who's going to enlighten us about tariffs, especially when it comes to Africa, because tariffs are something that's way above my head. I have no idea and can't explain them. So, Muktar, welcome. So let's talk about tariffs. Help the world, help the audience understand exactly what is a tariff.
Thank you, Dean, for having me on your program this morning. Tariff itself is not something that is new, but again, because it's not becoming a global trend, it looks like something that is new. Tariff in itself is not new. But what we need to understand about tariff is that most economy never grow with tariff. Tariff is just more or less like something you impose just maybe for temporary maybe temporary value for your own economy, especially when the balance of trade is very indifferent. It's very wide, so you tend to base tariff to cover it for it. But tariff in itself does not help any economic growth. It's economy do not grow by tariffs or levies. Economies grows by taxes and productivity. So when you bring tariff into the picture, it's a short-term measure. It never really helped any economic growth.
So help. We're going to talk specifically about Africa here in a second, but as an economist, do you have any rationale or thought as to why Trump is going down this path?
Well, I think he's doing what he has always told us he will do. So there's nothing new about it. I think he's looking at the American market, he's looking at the American people, he's believing that, look, American is no more the big brother of all of the world, whereby everything seems to rest on America, and America is the king, America is the donor, America is the supplier. I think he's trying to bring that notion. I think bringing a new economic shift. I would say the new shift to trading, to the way we do things economically for now. But I know that you see, sometimes you see those economic point changes, they are pointing towards political issues in the near future. I think that is more concentrating in the economic changes. I think that's what he wants to do, and he has always told the American people, American first. So he's thinking of what value are you bringing to America? If you bring in value to America, how much of this value are you adding to the American people in terms of how much dollar or cent do they spend? Do they spend less or more? So I think that's what he's looking at.
So what is the impact on Africa? Let's talk specifically about Nigeria. I don't know the chart about what the tariffs are, if there's any about Nigeria, but talk to us about what the impact that these tariffs are having on Nigeria and then Africa at large.
Let me talk about Africa first. What we've seen in the market for some while, let it go at the American market, we've seen about 11 trillion wipeout in terms of GDP. In terms of the market and correction, or we call it a bearish trend, or we call it the Trump tsunami in the market, and that is about 54. That is the 11 trillion is about the 54 countries GDP in Africa. It took 54 African countries. That is personally the GDP. So what have been wiped up in the American market as of today, 11 trillion, which is more or less like 54 nations in Africa GDP wiped off completely. And when you look at French and even look at the economy of France and Germany, France and the UK, about 9.2 trillion also wiped off from their GDP. So the impact on Africa is huge in the sense that it depends on which country you're looking at. If you're looking at Africa, we really don't do so much trade in terms of trade volume with America. What we see in Africa is that we export our raw materials to those places where they are put into finished goods and sent back to us. So the impact will be in terms of how much of tariff do you put in those raw materials when they come to the United States, and how much of tariff will we African countries be able to impose on US product when they come to Nigeria or when they come to any of African countries. And if you look at the body language of the African leaders, I don't think they want to go into the trade war with the United States, because they know that they have a lot of policy depending on the United States. If you look at it, South Africa at the moment should have been going into a kind of trade war with the American right from when Trump came in. But you see, they are very labor because they know the impact in terms of AIDS, especially for South Africa, AIDS and HIV and AIDS impact that America have on them. But for other African countries, I don't think they really feel those impacts. For Nigeria, it should have been much. It's much somehow because, again, when you look at our country, what we export to the United States is gas, crude oil, oil and gas, especially crude oil. And if you look at that, that has not been affected by the current tariff of Donald Trump. I think there's an exemption on that. But the impact on us is the low oil price, the low crude price. Our benchmark is about $74 to $76 per barrel. Yesterday, it got to almost $60 per barrel. So that is the impact that it will have in Nigeria because we are an oil-driven economy. Our economy will go around what we earn in terms of export of crude oil. And now we've added another dynamics to it, export of refined petroleum product through Dangote refinery to other parts of the world. So the impact itself is not supposed to be much because those are not affected in terms of tariff. But the price, in terms of crude price, the impact on crude price will have an impact on Nigeria especially.
Interesting. Let's talk about the loss in the GDP. To the average Nigerian, not average, let's say the average African, let's just broaden it out. When you talk about losing $9 trillion in GDP, I mean, listen, for most people, including myself, when you talk about GDP and losing $9 trillion, I mean, it's kind of just, voodoo science, what we hear. But for the average person on the street, let's help the average person on the street understand the impact to them.
Well, Dean, the unfortunate thing is that the average person on the street will tell you doesn't even feel the impact of the GDP before now. So what's there for me? So it's that's a challenge for the average person on the street. But for businesses who tend to have a snowball effect to the average person on the street, it's huge. I just talked about the oil and gas sector, and I talk about Nigeria now. When you look at Nigeria trying to diversify into the non-oil sector, exporting of finished products out, especially agricultural products, so some to United States especially, that is going to be huge in terms of revenue that's supposed to come into the country. And in Africa, we have a lot of challenge. We have that challenge of GDP, we have that challenge of currency stability. So the more we are able to earn in terms of export and then foreign direct investors or portfolio investors coming into Africa, the more we are able to stabilize our currency. So if we don't do that, I mean, the impact on the average Nigerian will be huge because 70 to 80% of what we consume we import. So it's a very strong issue when you don't have a very stable currency and at a very stable rate where your currency is very volatile. Then that means the price of goods and services comes up, and that has an impact on the average Nigerian in terms of his earning ability has not improved, but its purchasing power is still where it is, but these goods have gone up beyond its purchasing power. So it drives a lot of people into the poverty line. That is one of the impact, how it gets to the average Nigerian on the street in terms of the current issues that we are facing.
It's interesting because last year sometime I was in Ghana. They just recently had a presidential election, and when I was talking to people in the local markets, the biggest issue for them was the currency valuation. That, as the currency devalued, they still had to buy the same goods and services that still cost the same amount of money. So their buying power was directly impacted. And in Nigeria currently, you are currently, correct me if I'm wrong, having a currency issue itself already. So is this going to exacerbate that?
It is going to exacerbate that, definitely, because again, I told you about we export crude, then we earn FX on crude, now do non-agricultural, non-oil sector, but in terms of volume, it's good in terms of value. It's not compared to the crude oil we export out of the country. We're in terms of value, in terms of dollars into our economy. So it's a huge challenge for us. And what that does is that we have the demand for FX, which is currency high, especially the US dollars, and the supply is low. But the CBN tried to move ahead during the week. Then on Friday, they did some injection of about 173 million into the retail sector of the Nigerian FX market or the currency market as a result of some of this tariff policy that is coming to train, especially the low oil price. So we want to see how that plan out. I think relatively with that, we saw a stable exchange rate on Monday. Well, hopefully we continue today. We've seen the exchange rate still, we're hoping between that corridor of stability, 1,500, 1,600, both on the FX, on the official foreign exchange market and also on the what we call the parallel market, because in Nigeria we operate almost two different types of markets. So that's the challenge. But at least it's hovering between that 1,500, 1,600. And this was due to the injection of liquidity by the central bank. They knew that this was going to be a challenge.
Well, you know, almost everybody believes that America, if they're not already in a recession, that they're going to be in a recession. And if, you know, even if Donald Trump were to say the tariffs wars are over, I don't know, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, America's heading for a recession in many ways. If America hits a steep recession, will that have an impact globally or in Africa?
Dean, when Americans sniff, the world sniffs. So definitely, recession in America will definitely affect some other countries, especially Africa. I told you we're largely depending on America for a lot of things, whether we talk about security or we talk about goods coming in from America. Then one big area that Africa really benefits from America is in the area of immigration, which has to do with diaspora remittance. A lot of Africans in America need to do a lot of remittance to their country back home. So once you have those challenges, recession comes in, then jobs are not there available any longer like it should be. The remittance also coming in will be low, and then that will have an effect on household, because some household depends on remittance from their own family members out there in America, in Canada, in any part of the world. And also Nigeria also, as a country, also depend on those remitters to stabilize our currency. So definitely we have a very strong impact when the US go into recession. But will that really drive Nigeria into recession or Africa into recession? I don't think so. But again, it will affect our inflow. But again, that also will bring our assets a little bit cheaper for those in the United States and other foreign markets to want to come to the emerging market. And that's where they will get more return comparable in being in their own economy. So it's not that straightforward, but definitely have an impact on us.
You know, one thing I'm noticing around the world, like even being here in the Philippines where I am now and talking about the tariffs here, and then I was in Taiwan before this, and you know how the tariffs impact that. I mean, the reality is what a lot of countries are realizing, and Europe is, when it comes to military issues associated with Ukraine, is that the world is realizing that they need to diversify and become less dependent on America, and as you say, less inclined to be harmed when America sneezes. So what would you be your advice for Nigeria? Let's talk about Nigeria specifically here for a second. We only have a minute left here. What is your advice to Nigeria to kind of better inoculate for the future against these types of swings in America's economy?
Definitely, we need to diversify. I mean, that's the key. We need to. We don't need to be affected so much by external forces, especially our economy, like I said, is largely driven by a crude oil price. So we need to diversify and begin to see how we can create other sources of revenue for the government, and also improve our tax net, especially in terms of getting effects from foreign companies that are in Nigeria. That will help us stabilize our exchange rate. But I think what we really need as a country is to diversify our economy rather than being an economy that's largely driven by the price of crude oil in the international market.
Well, you keep going back to oil. I mean, you know, as you know, one of the problems with oil, especially in that country, is that correct me if I'm wrong on this, but your cost, your break-even point, like for example, your cost of production versus the revenue you get from what is your cost per barrel there in Nigeria? Do you know?
Well, the cost of production here is very high. In terms of cost per barrel, it's not comparable to what you have in the United States and other countries. But again, you need to look at our earning ability. How much do we earn in terms of crude? I mean, in terms of the earning power of the Nigeria, then he has to put gas in his car. So that's a major problem. But in terms of the barrel of oil in Nigeria, which we do in terms of liters, presently, if you look at the exchange rate between the naira and the dollar, it's still not up to $1 per liter of fuel. And when you look at that, I think with your barrel, which is like 4 liters, you see that it's still a little bit cheap in terms of when you want to buy. But again, when you look at the earning ability, it's very expensive.
Yeah, and I have to go here, but one thing I would argue in countries around the world that we talk about is that those that have natural resources, that if you can reduce your costs or produce those natural resources like oil, will make you stronger in the long term. So that's one thing that maybe Nigeria could look at. Mukhtar, thank you very much for being with me today. Very informative because when it comes to tariffs and I'm from Alabama, man. I don't even understand taxes or anything except I hate to pay them. That's the one thing I do understand. Anyway, thanks everyone for being with Dane Waters at Around the World
Thank you
with
for
Dane
having me.
Waters, and we will see you again next week. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.